Welcome, everyone. I'm glad you could join us today for this webinar on remote work in Hawaii. Today's event is part of Hawaii's Digital Inclusion Week, which runs all this week, started on Monday the 3rd, and will run through Friday, October 7th. The goal of Digital Inclusion Week is to promote digital equity across the state. We have a series of events going on across all of the islands, the goal of raising awareness of the solutions that can address some of the sources of digital inequity. Things like raising awareness of ways to address home internet access, and access to computers, and local technology training and support programs. For a full list of the Hawaii Digital Inclusion Week activities, you could visit broadband.hawaii.gov/DIW22, and I'll put the link in the chat for anyone watching at home. So thank you again for joining us. My name is Matt Stevens. I'm the Executive Director of the Hawai'i Workforce Funders Collaborative. We're an initiative that believes that through collaboration together, we can shape a different future where Hawaii's thriving residents and communities underpin a resilient economy. And so really at the heart of that is finding ways to create equitable access to good jobs. And so thinking about digital inclusion, if we think about the future of work and the good jobs that may appear over the next few years, if we want everybody to have access to these opportunities, we need to start thinking now, right, about the steps that need to be taken to make sure we're creating equitable access so that nobody gets left behind. And so that's why I'm so excited to be joined today by this panel of experts from across the state to begin the conversation about what the role of remote work for Hawaii workers could be, both as an opportunity to create equitable access to good jobs, regardless of where you live in the state, but also to think through the role of digital inclusion and making sure that these opportunities as they come aboard are equitably accessible. And so with that, I'd love to introduce our panel. We have Janine Suki, the Senior Manager of Government and Regulatory Affairs at Hawaiian Telcom. We have Scott Murakami, Economic Development Coordinator at the State of Hawaii Department of Business, Economic Development and Tourism. We have Constancio Paranal, Program Manager for Innovation and Technology at the Office of Economic Revitalization at the City and County of Honolulu, and Mericia, Palma, Elmore, Executive Director at SAG-AFTRA Local Hawaii. Thank you all so much for joining us today. So to get us started, kind of both to serve is a little bit of an introduction to kind of who you are and who you represent today. You know, I'll pass this. Maybe we'll start with Janine, but same question for everyone. You know, we all wear different hats on this issue, depending on kind of where we work and what our job is. But what we all have in common is that we're all workers, right? We're also workers who have had the chance in our jobs to be impacted and benefited by remote work. So I'd love to hear from each of you a little bit about your role and your experience with remote work. How did it make your job better? And what were some of the challenges you faced?
So I'll kick it off because I'm as you know, a very big advocate of remote work. Let me count the ways of why I see so many benefits. You know, it helps, you know, for example, lower your carbon footprint each and every day. It helps you maximize the most of, you know, the number of hours you're given in any day. And it helps you to be able to focus in and do some deeper work, whereas sometimes working in an office, you're a little bit more prone to distractions. So, you know, those are just three of the many different benefits that you know, I think we'll be able to touch upon here. But what really interested me, obviously, other than the pandemic, was just this necessity to have also to be an anchor for my own family, because we have a young son who is school age, and many of the, at least half of the time during the pandemic, he was homeschooled by not by choice. So for those particular reasons, I sought opportunities for remote work, and it's not very easy because this is something that most employers haven't thought about before. before the pandemic. But, and I've been with Hawaiian Telecom now. I actually specifically took on my role because our company has approached the pandemic and the recovery from the pandemic in a sort of holistic way, where they believe that remote work will stay as part of the fabric of the company, and giving folks the opportunity to reimagine how their careers will continue to evolve and so forth. So for so many reasons, I think that there is a lot of deep opportunity to talk about how we can normalize remote work, how we can support each other, and how we can make this type of work more equitable for many of the other employees that, because their jobs require them to appear in person. How can we support those workers to have also different opportunities to, do some remote work when it's possible?
That's great. Thank you, Janine. Scott, would you mind telling us a little bit about your experiences?
Sure. I guess to begin, I'll start from a departmental perspective and then work my way to a more specific personal experience for myself. So I think at DBED, we're looking at economic development, economic prosperity, and measures that exceed gross domestic product, or in Hawaii's case, gross regional product. So what we're looking at is the overall well-being of Hawaii's people, culture, and environment. The nice thing about remote work is it touches on all of those aspects, right? Done properly, and it leads to higher levels of productivity. It increases the overall well-being because you're not in traffic and whatnot. So I can tell you, in the survey that we did as a department, workers throughout the state who responded to our survey, there were three things that they saw as benefits, and they're just as Janine had mentioned. They were not having to commute. That was the highest benefit that people saw. Having this flexibility in their work schedule, and third was they could live anywhere now, because the commute and traffic times didn't dictate, and their commute patterns didn't dictate where the best place was for them to live. I think for myself personally, what made it great was, I help out my parents every day, make sure they get lunch, and make sure that they're okay and they get what they need. They're in their 90s now, and to be able to balance both the demands of work that we've had to face, as well as to be there for my parents, for me is really a blessing. It's really a joy to be able to spend every day with them and just make sure they're doing okay, make sure that they can have the life that they've wanted, which may not be possible if we didn't have the flexibility to do those types of things. That balance really leads to, for myself, a better place to be mentally, physically, as well as emotionally. So that does, in turn, make me more motivated to do a better job, increases productivity, and at the same time, I get the benefits that all of the Hawaii residents have spoken of as well. So that's my personal experience. Thanks for letting me share that.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Mericia, love to hear from you.
Thank you for letting me be part of this. So in addition to what I do with SAG-AFTRA, I also teach. So if I can come at it from that for a little bit, and I've been doing it remotely, mostly remotely, sometimes hybrid, since even before the pandemic. So I can see the level of accessibility, right? That just skyrockets when you get to a point where this is me teaching now. And it took a little bit, right? It took a little bit of getting used to, but I feel like the connections are there and they're meaningful with the students. Sometimes maybe even more so, because then there is the, hey, let's just do a Zoom one-on-one. And sometimes that's easier than waiting around for office hours. And I love the flexibility that remote work has afforded me, that I can do this because I do love teaching. This is why I do it, that I can do the teaching and still do the job I love with SAG-AFTRA too. So that is the Chihuahua dog, of course. We were just talking about the dogs. So that's what you asked also about drawbacks, that's one of them. So I love animals, I love rescues, and I've got a menagerie of animals. I've got, chickens also, and 3 children. 2 of them are still at my house. But so while it could, some days it gets loud and noisy, I wouldn't give any of that up as far as flexibility, number one. And I think, flexibility and accessibility for students. And then it's made me, I think, oddly enough, more engaged with a lot of SAG-AFTRA stuff we do because we are a national union. We've got 25 local offices everywhere. This is something we've been doing since before the pandemic, right? All the local directors getting together. But really with the pandemic, we've leveled up our game. And it's been really enjoyable to watch this evolution of where this is the default and not the, oh, well, they have to do this because she's in Hawaii. And that mindset, that change right there where it switches a little bit, I think that there's a world of just opportunity in that. And I'll echo about the productivity too. I think that is, you don't hear it too often, but yeah, for sure. For those of us who can sit down and focus and get more done. For me, I'm kind of social and I do the whole aloha tour. Janine may remember this from a job that we had together. I will walk around and talk to everybody. And if your door's open, look, here's my dog trying to talk to me. I will get up and talk to you. And this way it minimizes on that aloha tour that I do. So I hope that answered your question. I kind of touched on a lot of different things.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. Constancio.
Yeah, it's so funny. I
round
could
us
see
off.
your dog behind you, Mericia. Yeah. No, just like what Mericia had mentioned, I too teach at the Schuyler College of Business. And, it was one of those professions where we were just like other professions that we had to suddenly move to online teaching and remote work. And like what Mericia had mentioned, it was beneficial in so many ways. Of course it was challenging, but it was beneficial in the sense that, the education system was disrupted and technology and remote work was the only thing that allowed us to continue with our kids' learning, right? And that's very important, right? And so for that, the aspect of working remotely truly helped. And also during that time, a lot of our students need access to their faculty. And like what Mericia had mentioned, it was that level of accessibility and availability that really meant a lot to our kids and our children because of the stressors of the pandemic, right? That they needed to talk to someone or to consult with someone, and it made it very convenient and flexible and allowed us to connect with our students as well. Now, with the Office of Economic Revitalization, what's interesting about the office is that it was born out of the pandemic. So in some sense, it's a very innovative office. It has a very innovative culture. And we can't just stay within our cubicles. We have to go out to the community and we have to work with the community because we're serving a community that has been impacted by COVID and the pandemic. And so the ability to be able to do your work wherever you are while you're serving the community was very helpful because it allowed us to connect with our coworkers while also being able to connect with the community as well. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I hear a common theme kind of through a couple of these responses. I think, this is kind of anecdotal here, but I think one of the criticisms or hesitancies I've heard about remote work becoming a norm after the pandemic is that there's a fear that we're going to lose our interactions with our coworkers, right? That things are going to, the experience of being a worker is going to feel very removed. But in hearing you all talk, it sounds like, we may lose our interactions with our coworkers in the way that we're used to, but what we gain out of that is time with our families and new ways of connecting with our communities. And so I think just want to raise that up from what you all said, because I think it changes that narrative a little bit. Any thoughts on that? Scott, I see you have your hand raised. To that or in general?
So, yeah, Matt, that actually was a concern expressed by a lot of people in our survey, that they were concerned about missing the social interaction. They felt that was the biggest disadvantage to remote work, as well as the perception that working remotely could affect their career advancement. Those were the two things that really were concerning for people. But I think there's a couple things, right? For many of us, we worked remotely for many, many years. It's just the hours at work were time that we had to go into the office, right? But I don't know whether, I'm sure this happened to most people, but you come home and you start working, your day isn't done when you leave the office, right? But what I think for myself, what it did was it taught me a number of additional skills. One is you got to set boundaries, because if you don't at home, remote work's just going to take over everything, right? And so you as a professional need to set those boundaries. I think the other thing that was interesting is that, I don't, maybe it's just me, but I think some of the things that could be perceived as disadvantages are really opportunities, right? So for example, when you work remotely, you're responsible for data transmission from everything from that comes over your personal line, right? And companies did secure transmission protocol through the migration to VPN, but we become our tech support ourselves, right? So I actually took some classes in A+, security and network plus stuff, right? Just to kind of figure out, okay, do I really know what I'm doing with the technology, and how am I going to troubleshoot it if it goes bad? Because you gotta still get your work done, right? So these things that are perceived as disadvantages really do create opportunities for you. And the same can be said about the social networking aspects of it, right? So as the pandemic kind of, I guess, started to recede a bit, and some of the, I guess, lockdown items were lifted, I still went out to lunch with people, but I set those boundaries in place because I couldn't be at risk caring for my parents. So I would say, okay, I'll go to business lunch, but it's gonna be outdoors. It's gonna be someplace where, that is somewhat smaller than other places. But at the same time, I'm only gonna do maybe one a week and try to spread it out that way, right? So setting those boundaries actually allowed me to still keep the social interaction going, finding different ways to do it, because we hosted virtual pahanas with some of the groups that I've worked with. And we hadn't done that before, even with people nationally. I haven't had a chance to do that before. So again, they are perceived disadvantages, but as humans, our greatest ability is to adapt, right? And as professionals, we have to find a way to adapt in a way that doesn't let these types of responsibilities consume us as individuals. So that was my kind of experience with it.
That's a great point. I think you're right. I really like what you said about things that could be seen as disadvantages really are opportunities to do things a little bit differently. And it sounds like, there is more personal responsibility, right, as an employee, because like you said, you're not just showing up at your cubicle and your computer's ready and that there's someone you can call if it's broken necessarily. But there is an opportunity, right, for people to grow those skills and to kind of have more control and autonomy, like you said, and to kind of take more power back. I think about how they're spending their time and what they're working on. Janine, in your first response, you were talking a little bit about some of the things that the Hawaiian Telecom has done to embrace remote work. But I'd love to hear, maybe talk a little bit more about some of the steps employers can take to make this really work for their employees. If there's a employer watching this recording, what are some things they could be thinking about, right, that can help make this more successful and be the kind of company that attracts people like yourself who were specifically seeking out remote opportunities?
So, I mean, that's a good point. Like, I took a step back away from working during this pandemic because I wasn't able to, have those boundaries that I needed in place with being able to work from home. So when I was looking for remote working opportunities, not a lot of local employers tend to advertise that, they do have job flexibility in the form of remote work. So that, for one, could be a really good recruiting tool. And I don't see that still happening as much when you look in the, like the Indeeds or, the job boards. You don't see like Hawaiʻi employers associated with remote work opportunity. So, that as a starting point, I would recommend that if that is available or a possibility with a local employer, that, they start with that. Because I think as we've all like iterated here, people are looking for opportunities to have more job flexibility to improve overall quality of life. And that's, that's sort of now a new standard. And so that's a good starting point. The next place which I know that Hawaiian Tel does provide, is that we have tools that are they're through, they're hosted through the LinkedIn Learning platform, and we do have some other online platforms that help people learn how to adapt or adjust or to fine-tune their situation if they're working remotely, to have, better presentation skills, or here's a how-to, for organizing and planning an online meeting and how to facilitate that. And so there's a lot of multiple level, learning opportunities that one can provide. YouTube is another resource too. It's a free resource. It takes a little bit more looking through, but that's another resource. And then, out of the box, having the opportunity to be set up in your home workstation, having the opportunity to make it more ergonomic and comfortable to do remote work. I mean, that's pretty critical. And so having the opportunity to take home company equipment, larger monitors to do work more comfortably is pretty important. So I think it's just like, and those are just like kind of the basics out of the box, looking at remote work. As we continue to move down this path to embracing a flexible working environment, I know our company is we're taking steps to basically like consolidate office spaces and create more, less like working rooms with, like that where we share space together. So, no one is going to necessarily be expected to have an office or a workstation, but we're taking steps now to reimagine what those working spaces will look like, going into the future. And that is the next step for us, quite frankly. But as we have discussed, like, how do you make this more equitable for other employees? And that's that's another area that I'm pretty interested in trying to figure out. And I know there are some opportunities, where you as a field, if you're working in the field, particularly, you have 1 or 2 days with where there's an opportunity to do like desk related remote work, and that's helpful. Helpful to to help employees have that benefit from that flexibility too.
Yeah, one thing that you mentioned, I think is really important in all of this. Again, another theme I'm kind of hearing here is kind of an admission, I think, between employers and workers that, hey, we're all learning here, right? There's not a right way to do this yet. We're all, like you mentioned, we were kind of forced by COVID out of necessity to make this work, right? And we learned things as we went. Because we were sitting at computers, we could share things with our coworkers and with our friends working at other places. And I think there was kind of a learning mindset. And so kind of from that, I'd love to hear from Mericia or Constancio, both with your experience doing kind of remote teaching, what do you all see as kind of the opportunity that this next generation of students who've gone through remote learning through the pandemic will be more prepared to take on remote jobs through that experience? Thoughts or reactions to that?
If I guess I'll go first, because that's a really good question, and it's a question that requires a lot of thought, because I think I would be the last person to say I'm an expert in any of this. I think it's just because I've been thrown into it and I've been doing it now for a while. But you know, one of the things that is really helpful is going into it with an attitude of A, it's going to be different, B, we're going to have to evolve, but C, the biggest one really is engagement. That we're going to come into this and we commit now to engage. And I think if there were going to be, you know, students who may not take to it as quick, and those are usually the ones who don't go into it with that commitment. I think if you go into it with eyes open, and especially that engagement attitude, knowing that whatever, we're going to weather it together, we're going to go through this together, and we're going to commit to, you know, it's like anything, like with a startup, here's our mission. Here, I mean, for teaching, right, we have the syllabus and I put there what our objectives are, and here's the mission for what we're doing. And we're going to be engaged together and work through this so that we have this goal at the end. And so whether it's, you know, a class where you write a research paper or we're going to ace that midterm and final, I think that, to me, once you have that really guiding you, you got to roll with it. You roll with everything. You roll with, oh, this week this happened and this, that, and which is what happened a lot in the pandemic, right? Things happened. And you roll with it, but it can also be a great opportunity. So if I, you know, if I can share a little story, can I say and this isn't related to job as teaching, but what we had to do on the union side, right? So one of the things that we do a lot is a lot of fellowship and back to engagement, kind of engaging with, you know, the members, with the community, with industry, all this. And that's really hard to do when all of a sudden now we're not meeting in person and we can't. So one of the things that we did is we did, you know, a virtual networking thing, and speaking to, you know, being trained and going through that. I feel really lucky that, you know, we have a great IT team, a strong IT team, and like Zoom mavens, and I don't know what the male equivalent of Maven is, Maven or whatever, you know, just awesome folks who know how to do this to teach you. And then another great resource is we are an affiliate also with AFL-CIO, so with the state fed, and they did a whole series of this is how you do this for Zoom. So whatever it is, breakout rooms and all this. And we were able to, as best we could, mimic that kind of networking thing that we did, so that if, you know, like for the next couple of seconds here, I'll describe a little bit. We had a room for folks wanting to do voiceovers, a room for stunt performers, a room for people who are back, you know, and, you know, I think that we wouldn't have been able to have that flexibility where folks who maybe wouldn't get to network with those folks could now go from room to room to room to room, meeting folks who made video games, indie films, etc. So it kind of answers your question. I think I kind of got to it in a round way, but it is teaching too. And it's, for me, if we were going to like make a sticker and a buzzword about why I'm here, it's engagement. It's all about all of us coming together and buying into it, and we're engaging in it together. You know, otherwise, yeah, folks may get left behind and folks will bellyache about whatever. But if we make that commitment to it, I think it's a positive thing.
That's great. Any additional thoughts, Constancio, from your experience?
No, absolutely. I think I would, just to answer a question, I think that our students are prepared to perform in a virtual environment. And I think that's important because the future work is going to change. We can't go back to the traditional way of doing work, which is, you know, on site, 9 to 5. It's going to change. And I think what happened during the pandemic forced our students, forced all of us to, you know, look at this new environment, experience it, and figure out how can we perform given those limitations. And I agree with what Mericia mentioned, that I think what it did was it put some ownership on the students as well, that part of your learning is going to be on you. Or if you want to remain engaged, if you want to learn, you will have to take a little bit of ownership and accountability towards your learning. But that's also very helpful on the employer side, because it gives them an opportunity to understand this new generation that are going to be part of their workforce. They're learning differently, right? They're using technology differently, and that could aid them in creating policies with respect to, you know, either work from home policy or whatnot, right? So that could serve as a guide for organizations to start building that for their future workforce, right? And so I think in some ways that was very helpful. And if I could also add, I think, you know, with the question that you asked Scott a while ago, I think it is true that when with remote work, you lose, for organization, you lose some of these casual conversations, you know, chatting in the lunchroom, you know, before going to a meeting. Those are the times where we actually get to know each other personally, right? Those physical interaction provides spontaneous discussion and collaboration, which are all very important. But I think with remote work, what it helped us was it provided opportunities to use asynchronous communication or asynchronous methods of communication. And that allowed people, from my experience, allowed people to participate on their own timelines, right? It also provided opportunity to everyone for equal participation, because when we're in a physical setting, there are times when extroverts can pretty much, you know, dominate that conversation, right? But when you're in a technological platform with remote work, there is an opportunity for those who might not be that social, who may be more reflective, you know, to consider their response and think about it and participate more intentionally. So I think that's some of the benefits of it. And also, like, collaboration across departments. I think with remote work, it allowed us to consider and expand our network as well. Because when you're in a physical setting, you're kind of limited to the boundaries of your office, right? That's why the whole siloed approach to communicating and working, because we're all in the same kind of floor and, you know, within the same halls, right? But with remote work, there are no boundaries, right? And the virtual space is almost limitless in terms of boundaries. So then that's when you tend to expand your network and get to know people outside of, you know, a physical setting. So some things to consider. Yeah.
Yeah, great points. I really like what you said. In terms of the training, in terms of the learning, it really reminds me of a lot of the conversations I've seen kind of popping up in the workforce space over the past few years around kind of like skills-based hiring, and this idea that, you know, instead of just having these very specific pathways we go down, right? I got this degree, like we're really constantly learning different things. And even that approach that you all described, it gives us the time to take account for all those things that we're learning. But it's not just that I read the chapter and I did the homework and I passed the test, but I also learn how to use Zoom and can really understand all those kind of things you do at work on a daily basis that aren't part of your job description that are really valuable, right? And I think that kind of self-awareness, to your point, Constancio, allows people to really show up with their full self, right? And realize that I'm not my job title, I'm not my degree, I'm a person with gifts, right? And I come with my experiences. And I think as an introvert, I can say that there's been opportunities to show up in that way. For instance, this is going a lot better than it would if we were on a stage in front of a lot of people, from my perspective. Scott, I might turn it to you for a second. You know, I think we've heard a little bit about kind of the ways in which, you know, learners can gain some of these skills and towards remote work, and the way that higher education is shaping. And I want to, you know, and Janice talked about the ways that specific employers that are kind of ahead of the pack are taking some steps to make remote work possible. What are some of the resources that the state has available to employers who might want to think more about remote work? And I guess that may be a two-parter, just because I really appreciated some of the points you made when we were preparing for this. Kind of what's the incentive for employers to want to venture into this and into this new frontier and change the way they're working with their employees?
So if it's okay, I'll start with the incentives first, and
Yeah.
then we can talk about some of the resources. And I'm going to try to segment it from what we were talking about earlier in terms of what businesses can do. You know, during the pandemic, based on our study, businesses made a significant investment, financial investment into technology. The firms that offered remote work that had made an investment in remote work for the employees, 89 or close to 90% had invested in hardware, right, to ensure mobility. 82% invested in collaboration tools, and about 61% invested in increased security. So as with most things, right, the technology investment at that time was challenged a little bit with the logistics, the chip shortage, and those sorts of things. But those are challenges that we were able to overcome. My thought is what businesses really can do to encourage remote work is to look at a couple of additional opportunities now, because now that they have the infrastructure on, right, this is a time where they can shape the corporate culture for themselves. So things like what Janine was talking about, LinkedIn Learning is a great resource, right? So setting up a corporate culture that accepts micro certifications and other forms of certifications as validation for individual professionals, taking, as Constancio said, taking responsibility for their own learning is a great way to create an enhanced corporate culture. I think the courses that Janine was talking about in LinkedIn Learning is a learning path that's dedicated specifically for remote work. It's a 13-hour pathway, and it's a great course. It teaches you about different collaboration tools and whatnot, and it's made up of short 1-hour types of courses. You take a bunch of them, and next thing you know, you finish the pathway and you get a credential for it or a certificate for it. There needs to be valuation on that, right? So an organization that values, hey, if you're going to invest the time in learning these things and document it for us, you know, we're going to create some incentives for you to have better performance review, whatever it may be. So it really is an opportunity now that we've made this investment into the infrastructure to say, what do we do about the culture? How do we support the people so they can leverage this technology to improve their overall productivity and their experience at work? And the reason for that is how we get into the incentives, right? Part of the reason why I think what should incentivize businesses to do it is to recognize that if you're in certain industries, remote work is something that is not limited geographically to Honolulu. So the industries that we found in our study that really were impacted by or really embraced remote work were professional, scientific, and technical industries. It was finance and insurance, educational services, information technology. Those were the ones that were really capable of offering remote work. And it's interesting because I pulled some data on job posting analytics before this meeting, and there were nearly 25,000 unique job postings that reference Hawaii that are available now. 25,000. And so if you think you have a labor shortage now, this remote work opportunity is bringing people jobs from offshore onto the island to try to find people. So part of it is an incentive to just remain competitive in a very, very tight labor market where employees have tremendous amounts of bargaining power. That probably is the biggest incentive for people to embrace a culture that allows greater flexibility, allows for the remote work, creates opportunities for collaboration and improved ways of interacting so you can get the benefits that Constancio had spoken of earlier. So in my view, that's really the incentive, that if you don't do it, if you don't take advantage of leveraging the financial investment you made, the opportunity to change your corporate culture, to embrace professional development, then somebody else from somewhere else is going to attract your worker. And so I think from our side, from the state side, right, we have had benefits in the past, shifting to your next question, about what types of programs are available. I think for ourselves, when we started out the remote work project at DBED, that project was really, it started at the height of the pandemic. And the idea was that if we couldn't get people jobs locally because of the lockdown, then we're going to have to find them something remotely elsewhere. And so we were able to work with a couple of companies. One was called Instant Teams, that actually hires people as covered employees and then goes out and contracts services for them. So they form a team, and that team then gets contracted out to perform certain types of services. The other one was called Flex Jobs, and Flex Jobs is the leading job board for finding remote work opportunities. And the reason we wanted to get an opportunity like that going is because we wanted to be sure we worked with a company that vetted these jobs and reduced any risk and exposure to Hawaii's residents. Since then, the Instant Teams program has ended. We were able to get 100% placement in that, but the Flex Jobs opportunity is still available for people who are interested. So if they go to our website, invest.hawaii.gov/remote, they can register to receive a subscription, 1-year subscription to Flex Jobs, and then go ahead and register on Flex Jobs to find a job. So there are other things that the state's doing through the broadband Hui and the digital equity office at DBED, as well as with digital literacy. And I think those, our biggest concern, right, is that there is a digital divide. And with each industrial, and this might be a little bit, a little out there, but, with each industrial revolution that we faced as a society, there was a drop off in people that just could not participate in that, in the new evolving industrial capability of society. And this time it's going to be tough. It really is. And the reason is that the technology changes so quickly that if you fall behind in it, it's really, really difficult to get back. And the exposure is really great because of the cyber threats and whatnot. So the digital divide that's growing is something that we really have to address. And I think that the efforts that are going on with, I think it's the, what was it, the remote ready Hawaii, the Hawaii Digital Literacy Initiative, I think is the one, with the public libraries and the Department of Labor. I think we had, our program provided some refurbished laptops to that initiative. That effort's important. It really is important because it brings people along, introduces them to the technology, and it does it not just to working age adults, right? It does it intergenerationally, and that's the important part because you have to get people embracing the technology at all generational levels. So those are the programs that I know of. I'm sure there's others that are going on, but those are the ones that I'm familiar with.
Wonderful. Thank you for those thoughts. I know with that digital literacy program, one thing that stands out to me from that is they tested a couple of different approaches at delivering those services that they found. When they go into communities and meet people where they are and provide them access to computers kind of in their own home space through a trusted source, they had a lot higher uptake. And so I think when we think about digital inclusion and digital equity, it is about a lot of new tools, right? But to all the points you all raised today around community and more time with our families, it's an opportunity to meet people where they are with these technologies and to help people who might not, have exposure to these things to find ways to make it a part of their life rather than something extra they have to do. So really, really energized by the stories you all shared today and a lot of the great work that's out there.
Matt,
Yeah.
I wanted to add on to what Scott said, if I could. So, part of the digital literacy and digital equity pathway is to provide the right tools and training to access what's available online. And But one of the things that we have also seen is that there's just been, there is available services in Hawaii for broadband. Many cannot afford it, but many of those who cannot afford it still do not know that there are programs which are basically the affordable connectivity program that make broadband access to the home more easily available. And for qualifying households, this provides a service to connect to broadband, which they start at about 100 megabits download. Some are, and some fluctuate. I know Hawaiian Telecoms provides 100 megabits symmetrical download upload as a part of our offer for the $30 rate, which for qualifying households, that would be free because $30 is the federal subsidy. But if you look around, if you look at the statistics that are being reported weekly on broadband Hui, we still have quite a ways to go. I think only there's about something, and if you have the correct number, but it's a little over 150,000 potentially eligible households in the state that could qualify for ACP, but only 31,000 have availed the service so far. And so, that's another area that we need to continue to do some more outreach and push, because, to kind of address what Scott's point was, there's going to be a great big, like the chasm of people that will be potentially left behind is going to get even deeper because of the significant acceleration towards the digital media, digital economy. So this is some of the tools, the policies that have been thought out during the pandemic, are pretty critical and are meant to be like a springboard to not only get our economy back in action again, but to really prepare people, especially those who are normally not included in this digital economy, the right tools to get up to speed.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. I shared a link in the chat that should come through on the recording as well, that folks can click on to learn more about that ECP program. And I think there may be an opportunity to screen right there through that website. Thank you for bringing that up. Any other final thoughts before we run up on the end of our time here today?
I can throw out a plug for some stuff that we do as far as education education goes. This is speaking to a little bit of what Scott said, and also Janine about the divide. And we're getting to, this is something that we can foresee with just in the arts alone. So one of the things that happened during pandemic is auditions changed, right? How you get the job as an actor changed. While some folks, especially in Hawaii, we had it here, because we are so remote to begin with, where there were people doing virtual auditions, virtual this and that, right? But when the pandemic happened, we were very fortunate that we, had all these COVID protocols. So still, we still could watch Netflix. Still, stuff was getting made constantly. I mean, there are a lot of award-winning things being made still, but those have to be populated with actors, and those actors need to get jobs. And one of the things that the union does, which I'm very, very proud of, and I didn't think to have a link, but if you go to YouTube, it's the President's Task Force on Education and Engagement, PTEOE. There's a whole YouTube channel and offerings on how to self-tape, how to self-submit an audition, how to self-tape for voiceovers, all these tools, because we don't want people to be left behind. I think sometimes, I'm firmly in Generation X. I'm technically not, a digital native or anything. I had to learn it. I remember getting an email in college and all this. So I'm aging myself, but there are some folks who live this and this is just them. And there are a lot of folks who aren't. And guess what? They're still working actors. They're still working voiceover performers, and they need to know how to do this. And so one of the things that I'm proud of our union for doing is making these tools available for everybody. So that, you know, here's how you do it. Here's what you do to, you know, do well in your audition. Here's how you submit. Here's what you do for, you know, getting this job. And so that's my little plug. And I wish I would have had the forethought to come. Oh, look, there's a link. So there, you know, we have a whole YouTube channel where all kinds of offerings, and there's also some fun interviews and things like that too. But we want to be able to educate all of the members, no matter if they're old hat and make videos all day long and know how to submit, to, you know, folks who may not know how to do that or how to light themselves well or sound, you know, all of these things. So there's my plug. My final thought is to plug Work for Actors in Hawaii.
Well, I think for me, Matt, I think just to echo what everyone said, I think when we think of digital inclusion within the context of remote work, I look at it from two perspectives. One is access, and the other one is equity, right? Because anything when it comes to remote work, everyone should have access to it, not just a small group of people. And also understanding not every type of work can be done remotely, right? And so there's that equity piece. And so I think it's very important from an employer and an employee perspective to understand that perhaps those are some of the barriers, if you will, that some employers are kind of having to deal with, because it has to be accessible and it has to be equitable to everyone. And when we think about equity also from that standpoint, I think it's also understanding, just like what Janine, Mericia, and Scott mentioned a while ago, like when with respect to broadband infrastructure in the city and county of Honolulu, I feel like we're a little bit blessed because infrastructure is built, right, compared to other islands. But that doesn't mean that everyone has access, that everyone affords, just like what Janine had mentioned. So you could have a family who has, you know, access to, or where it lives in an area where broadband infrastructure is available, but only has one computer for that household. So how do they participate in the digital economy, right? So it's also very important to look at it from that perspective. And then also just one final note is that it's also important to think about people with disabilities, because just because we're in this realm of technology where we think everyone can do it anywhere because, you know, they have access to a computer and the computer has the functionality to be able to provide closed captioning, etc., all of these things. I think it's still very important to think about, you know, people who may have certain disabilities that might not allow them to perform and also be a participant, an active participant in, you know, in the workforce when it's done remotely. But maybe providing the tools, like what everyone in the panel had mentioned, is key in allowing them to be an active participant despite or in spite of their disability. So thank you for having me. Learned a lot today.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your contributions, your stories, and your perspective. It's clear there's a lot of opportunity. This was a change that was sort of thrust upon us, and it's inspired a lot of innovation. But with that, you know, to all of your points, a need to be thoughtful, right, and proactive, and thinking through what the new opportunities are, and thinking now about what steps need to be in place, right, so that we can make sure that these opportunities really are available to everyone equitably, and in a way that includes everyone. And so obviously this is the start of the conversation, not the end of it, but I appreciate you all taking the time to add some additional perspective and help maybe illuminate some people's experiences and understanding beyond their own personal experiences that they may have had with remote work. So thank you all for joining me today. And thank you for those of you all watching this. Really appreciate your time. And with that, I will send us off. Thank you, everyone.